So thank you all for coming out this evening in these very unusual times. Perfect night to be tasting some white wine, especially a couple of different Chardonnays. As I mentioned earlier, what the focus of this seminar is going to be talking about the Chardonnay grape, and the two wines that I've picked that I'm going to be tasting and talking about in particular come from polar opposites of the range of styles of wine that Chardonnay can produce. On the one hand, we've got a Chablis from the northern part of France that shows the most stripped down, purest, in my opinion, purest form of Chardonnay without any additions to it, minimal winemaking, cooler climate that really shows the tension and the finesse that Chardonnay can have. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have California oak Chardonnay. We're using Rombauer from Carneros, which shows just how complex and still maintaining its balance, and how wonderful Chardonnay can be in a warmer climate when we wrap it in oak and we put it through a secondary malolactic fermentation to bring out even more flavors, and how through it all you can still appreciate the quality of Chardonnay even though these wines are so very, very different. I'll start off by saying that so Chardonnay, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the way that we label wines in what we call the New World in the United States, in South America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, we call the New World, we label the wines by what the grape is. So when we go and we purchase the bottle, we get Rombauer Chardonnay, or we get Spotswood Cabernet Sauvignon, or a Pinot Noir. So we're looking for the name of the grape on the label. When you go to the Old World, meaning basically Europe, France, Spain, Italy, etc., Germany, the vast majority of the time they're labeling their wines by the region. And there's a couple reasons why they do that. First, I think primarily is they feel that where the wine comes from is more important than what grape is used to make the wine. And they've been making wine for, hundreds, if not 1,000 years longer than we have in the New World. So with that extra amount of time they've had, they've figured out the best grapes to grow in each of these spots. So, for example, in Carneros, you're allowed to plant and make wine from any type of grape you want to. So you can plant Cabernet if you wanted to in Carneros. You could plant Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, whatever you want. So to say that the wine comes from Carneros, really that only tells you that the wine comes from Carneros. It doesn't give you a lot of other information. In the Old World, they limit, each area is a little bit different, they'll limit the number of grapes that are allowed to be grown if you want to use that name. So for example, in Chablis, they only allow one grape to be grown if you want the wine to say Chablis, and that's Chardonnay. So if you see a bottle of Chablis, you're guaranteed that it is 100% Chardonnay. In Burgundy, they have a couple of different grapes, but really they really limit it to two. They have Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So if you know the different areas and you know what the laws are, you can figure out what's in the bottle even without having it listed on the label. But it does make it a little bit more confusing. So we do have two Chardonnays here today. I think before we get into the tasting, another thing I think is really fascinating about grape varieties, all of them, is that these grapes, if you were to take a Chardonnay grape and plant it in the ground, a new vine would grow that would produce grapes, but it wouldn't be Chardonnay. It would be some new, different mutation of a wine grape. So the only way to get Chardonnay is to clone the cutting from an existing Chardonnay plant, which means, if you think about it, all Chardonnay goes all the way back about 900 years, all the way back to one single plant that got propagated and cloned over and over and over again to produce now what is the most popular, most widely planted white grape in the world is Chardonnay. It all comes from one plant almost 1,000 years ago. Pretty mind-blowing when you think about it that way. Grapes aren't the only fruit that does that. Apples do that. A lot of other fruit does that as well. So it is really unique that it all goes back to one plant. So for the tasting today, I thought that we would talk about different aspects of where the wines come from, and then how we treat them once we get the grapes into the winery, and kind of taste these wines side by side. But we'll talk about the climate first. One thing that's really fantastic about Chardonnay is that it produces different flavors depending upon what type of climate it's grown in. If you have your Chardonnay in a cool climate, the predominant fruits you're going to get are going to be more citrus, the lemon, the lime, maybe a little bit of grapefruit, and green apple, maybe a little of green underripe pear. And that's going to be the fruit set that you're going to really experience in a cool climate Chardonnay. When it starts to warm up and you get into a moderate climate and a little bit warmer climate Chardonnay, we still see some of that citrus and that apple, but now we're going to add in some stone fruit. So you'll start to see a little bit of peach, maybe some nectarine, possibly some apricot flavors added into that profile. And then when we get into the warmest climates, we start seeing tropical fruits. So we'll start seeing some melon, we'll see some pineapple in particular, maybe even a little mango added into that. So you can, as you taste these wines and you look for those different fruits, it can kind of give you an idea of what type of climate the grapes were produced in. Other thing about Chardonnay is that it's considered to be a non-aromatic grape. Doesn't mean that it has no aromas to it, but compared to a Sauvignon Blanc or a Viognier, Chardonnay has a lot less volume of aromas, which means that it takes to different types of winemaking techniques very well. So, for example, it does well with oak. So let's take our two wines, if you've got the two wines. So I've got my Chablis here and my Rombauer here. And if I'm going to look at the color of these wines, right off the bat, I'm getting a darker color and more of a gold color in the California Chardonnay than I am in the Chablis. So both of them are about a medium intensity color, but I'm going to say that the Chablis is more of a lemon color, and the California or the Rombauer is more of a gold color. That comes from the fact that the California wine's coming from a warmer climate, and also, as we'll talk about later, it has oak added to it, which add a little bit to the color. So let's smell both of these wines. So if you smell the Chablis first, very clean, very crisp. There's fruit and a lot of minerality. So you're not going to get any oak flavor, no butter flavor coming out of this, no vanilla, no spice. Really, it's really just the citrus fruit, that green fruit, and then a lot of minerality coming out of it. So just smelling this, now I'm getting lemon, lime, grapefruit, green apple, maybe a little bit of green pear, and it kind of stops there. So what that's telling me is this wine is coming from a cooler climate environment. If I move over to the Rombauer and I smell it, much bigger aromas, and there's a lot going on here. But if we push aside the aromas of oak and that buttery smells that we're getting and focus just on the fruit, I'm getting that citrus fruit is there, the lemon is there, but now it's more of a red apple. It's a much riper pear, maybe even a little bit of apricot. And then what really stands out is I'm getting that pineapple, almost like a grilled pineapple, very ripe, and maybe even a little bit of melon in there. So it's telling me that this is coming from a warmer climate, that it's giving me more of that tropical fruit and that stone fruit that I would associate with wines coming from a warmer place. Let's go ahead and try them. If you've got these two, so try the Chablis or the unoaked Chardonnay. It's awesome. Again, that citrus, that green apple, pear comes through. Acidity is really driving this wine, high acid. The other piece that's really prevalent is the minerality. Chalk, dry stone, flint, maybe even a little gun smoke, very minerally, gravelly type of aromas and flavors in this. Really beautiful wine, really finesse-driven wine, a lot of tension with that acidity, with that fruit, and then that minerality component make it just a really pretty wine. If we move over to the Rombauer and give this a taste. Much bigger wine, much bigger wine. Still has at least a medium level of acidity is there, but texture-wise, it's got a fuller body wine. I'm getting that lemon is there, apple is there, but instead of being a green apple, it's more of a red apple. And then we're getting that pineapple and that nectarine and stone fruit, even a little bit of that apricot is coming through. And then we have all the oak, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you can see just by tasting these two wines, just how apparent the difference in climate can be. Difference between, in this case, a cool climate being Chablis and a warmer climate being Carneros. See if I can pull this off here. I want to show you a map. So here's a map of France. And if I zoom in here, so the main part of Burgundy, when we think about the really expensive white Burgundies and those really expensive red Burgundies coming from the Côte d'Or, it's coming down in this region down here. And then we move down to the Maconnays, which is also known for really fantastic Chardonnay wines farther south. So this here is Dijon. So from Dijon down to just north of Lyon is the main portion of Burgundy. For Chablis, we actually leave this main part of Burgundy and we travel about 90 miles northwest, much farther north, where we're south of Paris and just south of the Champagne region, where we find the Chablis region. And again, Chablis only produces white wine, and all the white wine has to come from the Chardonnay grape. And just to give you an idea of relation, this longitude line here, latitude line here, is about equal to, it's about Seattle, maybe Vancouver. So we're pretty far north. We're right on the US-Canada border when we're up this far. So you can imagine how much cooler it is, although especially these last few years it has been hot, but this is a cooler climate here. We get a lot of sun, especially because the sun sets so much later this far north, but we don't have the heat that we have, that we're used to seeing in California. Because I don't have a map of California, but Carneros, Napa Valley, really, it's down here. That's equal to about southern Spain. So we're much farther south, almost into Africa when you're looking across the same line. Now, the temperatures are different because we've got the Pacific Ocean with the currents coming down from Alaska that cool things down, but we are much hotter here than they are in this part of Chablis. One of the other differences is, Carneros is just north of San Pablo Bay, and as we all know, that fog likes to come in right here past the club and goes right down and takes a left just before Berkeley and heads up into San Pablo Bay. So there's plenty of fog up there, but the regular daytime temperature is much hotter in general than it will be in Chablis. So Chablis may get some more sunshine compared to Carneros, but Carneros is going to get, in general, much more heat than they would up there. So that accounts for the differences in the climates. A couple other differences that I think are really interesting is in Carneros, the soil there is generally a clay soil. San Pablo Bay used to extend much farther north and covered that what is now that vineyard area for tens of thousands of years. So that's a lot of silt, clay, a lot of sediment that's come down over the Napa River over the millennia and settled in that area. So it's a harder packed, cooler soil, which is very helpful for that area. When we look at Chablis, they have a really unique soil that's really quite famous and is unique to Chablis and to Champagne, and it's called Kimmeridgian soil. And what that is, it's basically dead oyster shells. That whole part of France, that eastern part of France, used to all be underwater, the English Channel. Of course, they don't call it the English Channel in France, but that water came in and covered that whole part of France for, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And so all those crustaceans settled down, and that's the majority of the soil. So this very white, very chalky soil in Chablis and in Champagne, which really helps with that minerality that we get out of the Chablis. If you've ever seen the White Cliffs of Dover, that's the same stuff. That's Kimmeridgian soil, that real chalky limestone. So really unique there. I think that's all I can say about the growing climates there. So really are very unique, but Chardonnay does great in both of those places. So let's taste those one more time, just to kind of hammer home what I was talking about, the differences in the minerality. So look for the minerality in the Chablis, look for the green fruit in the Chablis, and then look for that tropical fruit in the Rombauer, and that bigger mouthfeel. You'll feel more alcohol coming from the California Chardonnay, 2% higher alcohol, and that comes from the riper fruit as well. Mm-hmm. There on that taste side by side, get the minerality really drives home with the Chablis, and just on that sip right there, the Rombauer was like, it was like almost like pineapple juice. Really, really pretty, very rich wine. The other thing that makes these wines really very different, and is probably the most obvious difference with them, is the use of both oak and what we call malolactic fermentation, which is a secondary fermentation, which I'll describe in a moment. The Chablis is made completely in stainless steel, never touches oak. The closest that it's ever been to any wood was probably the winemaker walking around with his pencil making notes. The pencil was probably the closest thing that was ever to this wine. And that's true for the vast majority of Chablis. There are some very high-end examples, some Grand Crus, that will see some oak, but it's usually neutral oak, and it really is used to give it a little bit more flavor and texture to the wine. But certainly even in Chablis that have seen some oak, you really won't taste it that much. It's the idea of a Chablis wine is to drive that minerality and that pureness of the fruit. In the California wine, we really see the oak, and winemakers will use oak in two different ways. One is where they'll actually do the fermentation process in the oak barrel, which Rombauer does, which adds a lot of texture and some other flavors to the wine and really helps integrate those flavors. And then once that fermentation process is over, they'll let it age in oak barrels for another stretch of time. So barrel aging, which Rombauer also does. Some producers will do one or the other, but Rombauer does both. For them, what they're doing is they're using a mix of French and American oak, and they're aging it for about 9 months. It's about, I think it's 50% of it is new oak, which is quite a bit, and 9 months. And then even then they do another process where once the fermentation process is over, basically fermentation is the yeast going around and eating all the sugar in the grape juice, produces alcohol and a couple other things. And once all that sugar's eaten up, there's no more food for the yeast, and that yeast dies, and it falls to the bottom of your tank or your barrel. The winemaker will then remove the wine off of the majority of that dead yeast and move it into another container. And depending upon what you're looking for, you'll let that wine settle out, and the finer, smaller pieces of yeast will finally settle out towards the bottom of your tank. In the case of Rombauer and some other producers, they'll allow their wine to sit on that fine lees, on that fine layer of that dead yeast for a period of time, in this case, the full 9 months. And then every 2 weeks, they're going in and stirring it back up to move all of that dead yeast back into the wine and incorporate it around. And that gives a whole nother range of flavors. It can give more richness to it, but can give a bready, biscuity, pastry-like flavor and aroma to the wine. Easiest example, if you're looking for what the lees aging does, is, and here's a great excuse to do this, go open a really nice bottle of French champagne, real champagne, where that is a driving flavor and aroma in champagne, is that flavor you get from it being aged on the dead yeast. So that taste of a brioche or a biscuit, breadiness comes from the aging on the lees. So here we've got that 9 months of lees aging with the stirring every 2 weeks, which is a lot. And then in addition, in the new oak gives us a lot of that oak flavor. So if we want to smell this wine again, looking at the Rombauer, so this time, instead of looking for the fruit of the minerality, look for the flavor of oak. And the oak flavors are not just the flavors of wood, but look specifically for vanilla, is something that comes directly from oak barrel aging. And also look for a mix of spices. Generally, it's what a lot of people would say is, we call it brown spice or baking spice, which is that mix of nutmeg, clove, and cinnamon all put together. So if you picture the apple pie without the crust, you should get a little bit of that in this wine. So that brown spice, the vanilla, and also the oak. So if you smell for that, the vanilla is right there on the top, right? And that actually is coming from the oak. If you've ever used imitation vanilla, know that comes from oak barrels, which is it's not a bad thing. So it really does have that aroma of oak or of vanilla, and the spices there too. The oak will also give a richer mouthfeel and can really help get the flavors to kind of meld together a little bit better than, or quicker than they would if they were done without oak. On the palate, you can really taste it. You can taste that oak, you can taste the vanilla, you can taste the spice on there, along with all that fruit. Really nice, really nice. Getting almost like a nuttiness, like a marzipan or a little bit of almond on there as well. In addition to oak aging and oak barrel fermentation, another process that winemakers will use is what we call malolactic fermentation. Almost all red wines go through malolactic fermentation. It's just a given. It's white wines where there's more of a choice that is made by the winemaker, whether they want to allow that process to happen or not. What it is it's a second type of fermentation, but instead of a yeast, it's a type of a bacteria. And what it does is it changes the acidity in the wine. It doesn't increase it or decrease it. It changes it from one type of acidity to another. When we say malolactic, it's taking the malic acid in the wine, which I think of when I think of malic acid, I think of like green apples, that kind of harsh, sharp acidity. and it converts it into a lactic acid, which is a dairy type of an acid. When I think of a dairy acid, it's a smoother, softer type of acidity. So the acidity level stays the same, but the type of acidity changes. So if you go back to the Chablis, which has not gone through malolactic fermentation, the acidity is a little bit harsher. It's a crisper type of acidity. And when you go to the Rombauer, the acidity is still there, but it's a softer, gentler type of acidity. The decision to do malolactic is one that's it's 100% about style choice. It has nothing to do with quality. Rombauer does 100%, so all the wine has gone through the malolactic. Some wineries will take a portion. They may take half their amount of Chardonnay and put it through that process, and the other half they don't, and then blend them together so that the resulting wine has gone through 50% malolactic fermentation, or in the case of the Chablis, where they go 0% malolactic fermentation. If we go back to the Rombauer and look specifically for, this is where we're looking for that aroma and taste of butter and butterscotch, even popcorn. That is what malolactic fermentation brings to the wine in terms of a flavor component. The butterscotch, for sure, that butteriness is there, which brings up a really good avenue to bring up, which Justin was mentioning, was talking about food and wine pairing. So both of these wines, I think, are of very good quality wines. You may have a preference one way or the other, but I think they're both made incredibly well. They're both true to their type and really show what Chardonnay can be, looking at the polar ends. Of course, there's a million wines that run down the middle in between these two. But for food and wine pairings, they really showcase how you can pick Chardonnay and be able to pair it with a bunch of different wines, depending upon which type of Chardonnay you get. For the Chablis, the minerality and that citrus and that crisp acidity, to me, just screams for raw oysters. Is a perfect pairing for that. It can also handle wine or foods that have a fair amount of fat in them, because that acidity will help cut that fat. So rich cheeses, soft cheeses that have the high fat content, bries, some fresh goat cheeses that also have that high acidity, Chablis will pair with very well. Also does quite well with spicy foods. There's a lot of wines that will do well with spicy foods. Riesling is another one. But the Chablis does particularly well, especially when you find it at that lower alcohol level, that 12%, 12.5%, where that lower amount of alcohol, that high level of acidity will help cut the heat that you find in spicy foods. Looking at the Rombauer, lobster, crab with drawn butter, really rich foods, roast chicken, wines or foods that have a lot of complexity to them, a lot of fat to them, because the Rombauer, this California oak Chardonnay, still has a fair amount of acidity to cut through the food, but has that richness along with that actual flavor and texture of butter to balance well with some of those fattier, heavier foods. So this would go well with, like I said, I'm thinking seafood. Lobster Newburg would be great with this. Any type of food that's got some real richness to it. You want that food to have a complexity of flavors, otherwise the wine will overpower it. So you want something that not only has some fat to it, but actually has a fair amount of strong flavors to it. What else can I say about these wines? It's funny that Chardonnay is a grape that grows well everywhere and grows very easily. And so I say that one of my least favorite wines, say this delicately, one of my least favorite wines is Chardonnay, because there's so much just generic Chardonnay put out because it does well in very diverse environments with little intervention. But so in that regard, it's one of my least favorite overall wines. But when done well, like both of these wines, they can be some of my favorites. So in particular, for me, I gravitate towards the Chablis. I like that really strong mineral quality and that real high acidity. But Chardonnay is a really fantastic wine. It's a good entryway wine into the world of wines because it is accessible and comes in at a good price point at good quality levels. And if you stick with Chardonnay and you go looking for different regions and different environments and different styles, there's a huge array of styles within the Chardonnay category. So you can experience a lot of different styles of wine, still having that tether back to the fundamental quality of Chardonnay, if that makes any sense. I guess another way to look at it is you look at these two wines, and as different as they are, they still hold that core flavor and aromas of the Chardonnay, that fruit, that minerality that comes through the relatively low aromatics, and then handles the oak well, handles the mallow well, but also stands out really very well on its own. So great wines. I don't know if anybody had done or had a chance to download the tasting sheet. Did anybody have this? Was using this? Because we can go through this. Oh, you've got it. We can go through this if you'd like to. I kind of did a little bit haphazardly this time, jumping back and forth between the wines. But if you want to fill out the sheet for your own record to keep that, for me, I had the Chablis down the left-hand side, the one page you can use for both wines. Bring that back up again. So I had the Chablis here, the Chateau de Maligny from Chablis 2018, and then again my tasting notes on it were it was bright. I thought it was a fairly bright wine, and it was a medium lemon with medium legs. Thought it had medium aroma intensity, and then both on the aromas and on the palate, I got lemon, lime, and grapefruit. I got green apple. I got a little bit of peach and some tart pear. Didn't get any tropical nor any floral. A little bit of grassiness on there, and a little bit of like a dried herbal quality, maybe a little bit of dry thyme on the Chablis. And then down under minerality, my favorite category, definitely got the dry stone. Chalk, I wrote that in. That was probably the strongest aroma that I got off the wine. A general minerality, almost like a quartzy type of a quality, and even a little bit of flint and gun smoke in there. So lots of different minerality going on. No nuttiness to speak of, certainly no oak quality, and under maturity or other, maybe a touch of hay in there. But really, this wine is that citrus and that green tree fruit and that minerality driven wine. Under the flavor areas, I had it as a medium flavor intensity with high acidity. Wine is bone dry with medium alcohol and a medium body. I thought this wine had a long finish. For me, it was a good 12, 13 seconds long. That minerality really hangs in there. And I thought this wine was very well balanced. Although that acidity is really very high, it really carries that wine, and with that minerality and that green fruit, it really works very well together. Right now, I think this wine is moderately complex, and I think it's actually very good quality. It will last for probably 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and as it develops, it will develop more of that hay, that herbal quality. That fruit will start to dry a little bit, and we may see a little bit more of that smoke and that, and maybe a touch of toast coming out, not from any oak, obviously, but sometimes toast will come out in a wine after it's aged in bottle for a couple of years. So very good example of a Chablis. This was just a AC Chablis, so not from a particular vineyard or from a particular area. So that means that they could have pulled the grapes from anywhere within the Chablis region. But I do know that the majority of these grapes, if not all of them, come from the northern part of Chablis. Chateau de Maligny has been in Maligny, which is a commune of Chablis. They're pretty new to the area. They've only been there since the 1560s. So maybe just not quite 500 years, 600 years. And they have one of the biggest properties. So they've been doing it for a long time, and they certainly know what they're doing. They have a large number of bottlings, so different labels, specific single vineyards, Premier Cru, and a number of the Grand Crus as well. But this is their flagship wine, their general AC, meaning their Appellation Contrôlée for Chablis, so their general Chablis wine. And I think it shows beautifully for a $27, $28 bottle of wine. I think it's a really good quality wine. One thing I did get on this I thought was interesting when I first opened it up earlier today. I got some tartaric acid on it, which is something that you don't generally see anymore. It's gone off. Oh, it's still there on the top of the cork. Tartaric acid is naturally occurring in wines. For those of us who have been drinking wine long enough, we may remember years ago, decades ago, when you would chill a bottle in the fridge and it would get very cold, and you'd pull the bottle out and it would look like little pieces of broken glass in the bottom of the bottle. We remember that. That's tartaric acid, and it stays in solution in the wine normally, but over time it can start to build up on the cork. And again, if the wine gets very cold, it'll come out of solution and drop to the bottom of the bottle. So there's a little bit of that in this. Modern day winemakers, what they generally do is before they bottle the wine, they will very, very, very quickly chill the wine down so that tartaric acid falls out of solution, and then rack the wine off of that, take that off the solid tartaric acid, and then go ahead and bottle it so you don't get those little shards if you chill the wine down. Tartaric acid, for anybody that does any baking, that's where we get cream of tartar from, is they scrape the barrels and they take it from wine. So I thought that was interesting. There was some of that in this wine. For the Rombauer, so if you were to write this in, you have your Rombauer Chardonnay. The region here is Carneros. Both of these wines were 2018. The alcohol for the Rombauer was 14.5% compared to 12.5% for the Chablis. And I believe this wine is about a $36, $37 bottle. I thought this was also bright. It was kind of in between medium and deep. It certainly had more color intensity than the Chablis. And to me, I'd put it at gold. It's showing a lot of that yellow gold color in it. For the legs, I'd say they were pronounced, especially if you weigh a little bit, really heavy legs coming off, which, speaks to the higher alcohol and the higher concentration and extraction that we get from that wine. Moving down into the aromas and the flavors, not quite pronounced, but somewhere like I'd put a medium plus on for the aroma intensity on this wine. I did get the lemon. I got a lot of red apple here. There was pear, there was peach, a little bit of apricot, certainly got the pineapple, maybe a little bit of the melon, like a grilled pineapple, very ripe grilled pineapple, a little bit of melon. And under floral, even a little bit of like an orange blossom. Generally don't find a lot of floral components on Chardonnay, but got a little bit of orange blossom on this one. Under the herbal and spice, I got the sweet spice in there, but there wasn't any vegetal quality, no grassiness, nothing else there but that sweet spice, which I think is more indicative of the oak than anything else. And then under the minerality, more of a whetstone minerality, and it's certainly there, but it's just not as dominant, obviously, as it was in the Chablis. I did pick up some nuttiness, some marzipan, and maybe a little bit of hazelnut in the wine, which comes from that oak aging, the malolactic, and also from just the ripeness of the grapes. And then under the oak, we've got the oak, we've got the vanilla, we've got the toast, we've got the smoke. The butterscotch really put that under, I put it under the oak category, but that really falls under the malolactic area. But all 5 of those things are found in this wine, along with butter and popcorn. Yeah, I think that's all I put down in there. That smoke comes through a little bit. The flavor intensity, similar to the aromatic intensity, kind of not quite up to pronounce, but that medium plus. The acidity is certainly there, and this one's a good one to practice with because you can feel the acidity, but there's so much richness. There's a sense of sweetness coming from the fruit that the acidity is harder to discern, but it is there. It's not quite as high as the Chablis, but it is a medium, maybe a little bit on the side of medium plus on the acidity, but I'd go ahead and call it a medium acidic wine. As for the sweetness, obviously has more residual sugar than the Chablis. I'm inclined to still call this wine dry, and the reason why is because although there may be a point or two more of residual sugar in here, there's not enough to move it into the off-dry category. And in addition to that, I think a lot of that perception of sweetness is coming from the flavor of that really ripe fruit. So if you taste it again, and you get some sweetness up front, but after you've swallowed the wine on the finish of the wine is really rather quite dry. So that's why I say that I would still put this in the dry category of wines.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it starts off, you get that sensation of sweetness, which I think a little bit of it is there. It's really coming from the fruit, and then it finishes nice and dry. Alcohol, I'm going to put it at high. That's not a bad thing. It just is. Looking at the wines coming from all around the world, average is about 12.5%, maybe 13%. Here in the U.S., we're very used to seeing wines at that 14.5%. But when you take all the wines into consideration, we're used to very high alcohol wines. So I think the alcohol is really very well integrated, but I am getting, it gives me that warming feeling right in the top of the chest from the alcohol. But it's not out of balance. I think it's well integrated. For the body, I would put this at full body wine. It's got a nice richness to it. Very coats the palate, very full. Finish on this is also long, nice long finish for a number of these flavors come through on this and carry this wine for quite a long time. This wine is balanced, and this is where I think these two wines are such a great comparison, because the Chablis is balanced, and that balance is based so much on finesse, where it's not the most complex wine, and it's got that higher acidity and that tart green fruit, but it's very well balanced and runs a very fine line. Whereas the Rombauer, this is, if the Chablis is Bruce Lee, then the Rombauer is the champion sumo wrestler, right? Both very powerful, very strong fighters, but very different styles. So the Rombauer, everything about it is big, right? Full-bodied, high alcohol. It's got that higher flavor intensity, both aroma and flavor. Very complex, but it all works because it's all big, right? And it finishes dry and has enough acidity that it makes you want to go back for more, right? So I'm going to say this wine is balanced. Complexity, easy. If you look back up at all the things we circled and underlined up here, there's a lot going on. So I say this is a very complex wine. And for quality level, I say this is very good as well. So I put these both as very good wines. Just incredibly different wines, but both very good.
Yeah.
What I can tell you about Rombauer is almost as old as Chateau de Maligny. They started in the 1980s. So Chateau de Maligny only had about 500 years on them. But I think Corner Rombauer bought their first bit of property in the late 70s or early 80s and started their first vintage. I want to say it was 82. Really neat to look back at the history of that winery, if for no other reason, just to see who he was hanging out with. Because back then, when the valley floor wasn't covered with wineries and people were still just getting into it, people were sharing each other's spaces. And so for a while, he was part of Con Creek for a while, and then was first making wine at Stag's Leap using their wine facility. And then when he built his own, it was people like Spotswood that were coming to him and using his property before they built their own. So a lot of really neat, crossroads of what we now see as really fantastic wines came through Rombauer. So like I said, this one was 9 months in American oak. I'm sorry, I have it written down here. It was only 30% new oak, not 50%. So 30% new oak. They do the lees stirring every 2 weeks. One thing that they do that I also think is interesting is that they take and harvest, all hand harvested, all their grapes from all the different vineyards and vinify them all separately, put them through separate barrel protocols. So different types of barrels, different ages, from different vineyards. And so they have all these different samples of wine. And then at the end, after all the aging is done, they blend them all together. And then we'll let it sit for a short period of time for it to all coalesce. But they do a very good job of their blending to make something that maintains that high quality, but also has a very consistent, recognizable flavor year in and year out. So they're able to do a good job of leveling out vintage variation by vinifying everything separately in different barrel regiments and trying to blend after the fact, which is very similar to what they do in Champagne, which is hard to do. So that, you look at the price difference in these wines and you just look at price of Rombauer in general, and it's certainly not the cheapest wine on the store. And this really speaks to why, is because of the care and the extra effort they put into how they're growing the grapes, harvesting the grapes, and then the winemaking production in the vineyard is pretty intense. So, good.
May I add something to
Sure.
This is Barbara Leary. We've been to the Rombauer winery, and perhaps many of you have, but Irma Rombauer, the author of Joy of Cooking.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. That was his. It was his mother or grandmother?
Grandmother, I think.
Grandmother. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should all have that book. If you don't have that book, go and get it, right?
Perhaps absolutely right, Michael.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic book. It's that one, and I mean I have some French cookbooks, but that one and then Julia Child is those are the go-to.
The basis for all
Yeah.
culinary cooking.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good. Perfect.
so
Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
there was a pilot
Charles,
at Rombauer too.
I'm sorry?
There was a pilot involved with Rombauer.
Right, that was the founder. He was a commercial pilot for,
Defunct airline.
was it? Yeah. So he was in the Air Force, then he became a commercial airline pilot.
right, exactly.
Yeah. I
This
think that's where they got some of the money there, and probably from his grandmother to start the winery. Yeah.
So can I say
would you
that
please introduce yourself?
Charles Cunningham with Barbara here, and K&L is just a great place to always source your recommendations, because I looked around and that was the only place I could find it quickly.
For Chablis.
For Chablis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody has Rombauer.
Yeah. So K&L is one of my favorite stores. Love it. When I was choosing these wines, what I wanted to find was a good Chablis that would be easy to get in this environment, knowing that we can't go to a store and get it. So I found, luckily, that Bevmo carries this Chablis, and I checked around and they had plenty of it. And it's a number of stores around the Bay Area. Because at first I thought, I'll just pick a wine from K&L because I know that they'll deliver to me here in the city. But they're not as easily accessible for some people that aren't right in San Francisco or down in Redwood, or I guess Hollywood would be another. If you live down there, you can get it. But they're doing local deliveries, so they're still up and going. Great store.
What that reminds me of is that we should be still shopping at Bevmo instead of Total Wine and More.
Yeah, so you want to support the local, like a lot of the local shops are open. I went into Wine Impression up on, the one that's on Clement by Laurel Village, they're open. A lot of the smaller wine shops are open, even if you just go up to the door front or you call and have it set up, they'll even do some delivery for you. So, I mean,
Right.
I'm always going to support the little local guy for sure.
How about the Wine Club on Harrison?
I don't know if that one is open or not, but it's certainly worth finding out. Some of my favorite places, I do like K&L, obviously. I live out here in the Richmond, so I go to Blackwell's. And then D&M over on Fillmore and Clay is a fantastic shop as well. And then there are some really fun, they're not open now, but we're seeing more and more wine bars that are really wine bars / wine shops. So you can go in and browse and pick a bottle of wine, and either they'll open it and serve it to you there, or you take it home. Like a really fun one is Tofino, which is it's in that public storage building on top of the tunnel, on top of Geary and Masonic, right there. Great shop, but I don't know if they're back open yet. But good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Artisan Wines in Mountain View certainly is good. Then there's the one, trying to remember the name. It's out on Terraville. So if you go down 19th and go, I guess that's east on Terraville and go past the Safeway, 7 or 8 blocks, like up to the top of the hill, there's a small wine shop that's got a really eclectic selection of wines, and the folks in there are super friendly and really knowledgeable. That's a good place to go as well.
I have a question. This is Barbara O'Leary again. Regarding the Chablis and the Chardonnay, which are of the same, should they be chilled at a different temperature? I mean, if you want to be precise about it, or because I learned many years ago from somebody who said you don't want to over chill a Chardonnay because
Mhm.
it will bruise the flavor. And I'm wondering if that applies to the Chablis.
Yes, so that's a great question, is the serving temperature. For me, I keep all of my whites at about 50, 54 degrees. I like them a little bit warmer.
Yeah.
To make it, because I'm lazy, I set my wine cooler at 55 and I put them all in there.
Yeah.
And I just pull them out and drink them because I like my reds a little bit cooler and my whites a little bit warmer. But comparing these two, if you were to get into specific temperatures, the Chablis would show really well going down to a temperature of maybe 48,
Okay.
so a little bit cooler. The Rombauer, because it's so much bigger and riper, you want to allow all of that complexity to come out. So I would serve that a little bit warmer, maybe around that 52 to 54 degrees. What happens with the wines is the more you chill it, the less the alcohol is perceived. So it's easier to drink, which can be a dangerous thing. But it also can suppress a lot of the nuance of the wines.
Yes.
But on the flip side, if you're serving that wine too warm, then the alcohol becomes so noticeable that the wine can seem out of balance.
Yeah.
So I would say in that 50 to 55 range, you'd be pretty safe.
So got wine
Excellent.
cooler.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, wine cooler. I mean, I've got I have a dual temp, and I keep the whites at 52 and the reds at 56. But really, and that's just because it came with that feature. But I would be very happy keeping all the wines stored at 55. And that's if you've got a wine that is of not the quality that you may be used to, chill that sucker down and it will taste a little bit better. I'll say that. And then you get that higher end wine, that premium wine. Don't hide it behind the chill. Let that come up to temperature. I think the two things that we do in this country, the two big problems we have is in restaurants anyway, we serve our whites too cold and our reds too warm. You want, I mean, the whole red wine thing, we've always been told serve your red wine at room temperature.
Yeah.
But remember that rule came around back when Chateau de Maligny was first being founded back in the 1500s, when room temperature was about 55, 60 degrees, right? Not 72. So, don't be afraid to ask for your, I've asked for a wine, a wine bucket for red wine sometimes in restaurants. I get it and it's too warm, just throw it in there for a couple minutes and chill it down. And because as same as how too cold can close up a wine, too warm can make it so that you're not appreciating all the nuances either. So kind of that 50 to 58 is your safe bet.
Great answer, Michael. Thank you very much.
So we'll shut up and let somebody else have it. How about the guy with the beard?
See, am I unmuted? I am unmuted. Michael, I want to thank you for this. I think this has been a wonderful evening. Mark and I are celebrating our 42nd today. So
congratulations. Yay.
Happy anniversary. 42.
Happy anniversary evening here. So but Michael, I sincerely appreciate it. I think, with this COVID issue that we're facing right now, I think a few more of these over the next couple of weeks would be much appreciated.
Good. Well, let me ask, what other wines or topics would folks be interested in kind of jumping into?
Well, I think of one. We make wine up here in Vacaville, so and we made some very interesting ones. talk about some of the exotic California wines like Tannat and some
Oh yeah.
that have popped out. We've made an exceptional Tannat, but there are some interesting things going on in California. I think exploring some of the avant-garde areas of California winemaking would be an interesting one too.
That would be fun. Have you had Tannat from Uruguay?
Yes.
Yeah, they're putting themselves on the map for that.
We were making, yes.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good stuff. That's not a wine for the weak of heart, though. It's a pretty powerful wine.
Yes.
Ice wise.
Ice wines. So I have to see what kind of budget I have for those, but that would be great. Those are always wonderful to do. Could do dessert wines in general. Could do fortified wines if people like fortified wines. I'll say up front, I'm a Madeira junkie, so I could go on and on about Madeira if people like those wines.
Madeira would be good. You know, one that is that Portuguese Vino Verde, which nobody really, you know. I flew on TAP Airlines one time to Portugal, and I asked if they had a Vino Verde, and they said we don't serve that on our airlines. And
oh, well, dude.
But a Vino Verde is an incredible light wine for the summer.
No, it's delicious, and what's great is, like you point out, not too many people know about it. So the price is, it's undervalued. I'll say that. Yeah. That's another good wine. Would love to do. I mean, Iberian wines in general, could do a selection of wines from there. So, but for these wine tastings, so if I find wines, is it easiest if I source them from Bevmo? Is that what's easiest for people to get? Rather than especially if we're looking at the little more esoteric wines, I don't want to, frustrate people with wines that they can't get. We could do, comparing, like someone popped up, difference between, Russian River Pinots and Carneros, or could do, California Pinots versus Red Burgundies is another one to do that. So it was fun. Although I did that with a group a year or two ago, and I was shocked that in a blind tasting, how the differences is really narrowing between the Burgundies and the California Pinots. Yeah, it's a good problem to have. The wines are all exceptional, but that difference is shrinking greatly. So
Cunningham, also in Santa Barbara. I mean, they're two different.
Paso Robles.
It's very popular. If you have an assessment.
Yeah, we could do, Pinots are fun because, like I was saying about Chardonnay, that they do so well expressing where they come from. Pinot Noir does the same thing. It does a phenomenal job of expressing where it comes from. We could do, maybe we do 4 wines, and we do 1 Burgundy, maybe 1 Oregon Pinot, Russian River Pinot, and then the Santa Barbara, Santa Ynez, Santa Lucia Highland down there Pinot, and you can see what the climate does and what the terroir does for those 4 different wines. Because and that one it's Pinot Noir is more distinctive, so it's easier to see that core similarity with all the wines, yet really unique wines when you look at them all side by side from those different areas.
Sideways.
Yeah, sideways. There you go. No Merlot.
I just want to back up a bit. This is Barbara. You have an affection for Madeiras, and I love sherry. Are they similar? Are the same? Are they in the same family?
So they're in the same family because they're both fortified wines. So you make a wine and then you add, it's usually a brandy, a grape spirit that you add into the wine to bring it from that, 12, 13, 14% up to, anywhere from 16 to 20%, depending upon the wine. In terms of flavor, There are some sherries that can taste like some Madeiras, but they really are very different. And even within sherries, there's such a huge range of styles. That's a whole world in and of itself. Love sherries, absolutely love sherries.
Oh, good, good.
But
I
they're
have a question.
Mhm.
The difference from using proper glass?
Yeah, so glassware, if you listen to the folks from Riedel Glassware, you need to have 50 to 60 different wine glasses at home, right? I think there is a difference, but the difference is small enough that if you are looking to have, one or two different sets of glasses, having what we call Bordeaux glasses, these are more Burgundy glasses. I don't know if you can see that very well, with the more balloon, the wider bowl to it. The Bordeaux glasses are going to be a little bit more narrow, but what you want is a glass that's going to have a bowl to it, and then is going to narrow up towards the top so that it concentrates the aromas. And then the bowl is wide enough that you can be able to swirl the glass without it flying out. All wines are going to taste great out of a standard wine glass. I think getting into all the different types of glassware is a fun exercise, and there are some differences, more than I thought there would be. But I think investing in one good set of universal, that Bordeaux style glass is fine. If you wanted to get a couple of the big balloons for if you open up, a big Chardonnay or a big Burgundy, that would be fine, but you don't need to have a ton of different glasses. But with that said, I did do a tasting with Riedel a few years ago, and the guy, it was the son, Augusta Riedel, was presenting these wines, and we were tasting out of a big Burgundy balloon, a Bordeaux glass, and then he had a Syrah glass, a Rhone glass. And he was saying how his father would stick to the proper wine for the proper glass, except Oregon Pinots, he always used the Syrah glass for, because he said that it would bring out the pine scent that he found in Oregon Pinots. So if you're that type of taster who can differentiate the pine element in Oregon Pinots, go get the Riedel glasses. Otherwise, one set of good quality Bordeaux glasses will be fine.
Thank you.
One last question. How about a champagne tour sometime?
Champagne, to do a tasting of champagne, would love that. Speaking of glassware with champagne, use your wine glass.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So the flute, if you think about it, the flute is really good for one thing. It makes the wine look beautiful, right? Tall, slender, and you see that bead coming up. It's elegant. It's unique. We only use it that one time, and usually when we're drinking champagne, it's for a special occasion. Not many of us just open a bottle of champagne on a Tuesday night to watch the game, although I do sometimes. So it's a wedding, it's an anniversary, it's another reason for celebration. So you have that glass that's very celebratory, is very showy. But if you're looking to appreciate, really get into and focus and appreciate the champagne or that sparkling wine, regular wine glass far and away is the best thing, because it allows you to appreciate the aromatics of the wine.
Excellent. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah. Good. So I just want to know, what wine are you guys having tonight with your anniversary? Nope, you got you on mute still. There you go.
Yeah, I got to unmute here. No, we're drinking your wines.
Oh, very nice. I'm honored.
We found them, and of course, we produce our own Chardonnay out here in Vacaville also, but with Carneros grapes and local Vacaville grapes. So, but these have been nice tonight. Thank you.
Good. Good.
And,
there you go.
and obviously where we've been sequestered for 2.5 months, just being able to get out and talk to other people. This has been nice. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Hopefully, again.
Michael, you are essential.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to think so. At least to me, I am. Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to join us for this, and I will put some thought into what we can do next in the next couple of weeks. I've been writing down everybody's suggestion, so I'll put something together and we'll come up with a fun tasting that we can all do maybe the next 2 weeks or so.
Please do. Thank you.
Well, perfect. Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe, stay inside or on your porch. There you go. Cheers.
Cheers.